The massive alien ship appeared in Earth's orbit without warning. It was 3 times larger than anything humanity had ever built, and its presence made every world leader panic. Within hours, the aliens sent a message. They called themselves the Galactic Sovereign Council, and they ruled over 200 star systems. They had been watching Earth for decades, waiting for humans to develop faster than light travel. Now that humanity had finally achieved it, the Council had plans for them. Ambassador Ji-hoon was chosen to meet with the Council representatives. He traveled for 6 months to reach their headquarters, a giant space station that floated between star systems. The station was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Crystalline towers stretched in every direction, and ships from dozens of alien species docked at various ports. Ji-hoon had studied alien cultures during his journey, but nothing prepared him for the reality of standing before the Council itself. The Council chamber was enormous. Ji-hoon stood on a platform in the center, while holographic projections of alien leaders surrounded him. Most looked strange and frightening. Some had multiple limbs, others floated in tanks of liquid, and a few appeared to be made of pure energy. The one who spoke to him was called a Vorten. It stood 3 meters tall with a body covered in shifting metallic plates. Its voice boomed through the chamber like thunder. The Vorten explained the situation in simple terms. Every new species that joined the galactic community had to pay tribute to the Council. This was tradition. This was law. Humanity would provide 5,000 people to serve the Council's interests throughout the galaxy. These people would work in mines, laboratories, factories, and wherever else the Council needed workers. Ji-hoon felt his stomach turn as he realized what they were really asking for. They wanted slaves. Ji-hoon tried to negotiate. He explained that humanity didn't practice slavery anymore. He talked about human rights and dignity. The Vorten listened with what seemed like amusement. When Ji-hoon finished speaking, the alien delivered an ultimatum. Humanity would provide 5,000 tributes within 2 months, or Earth would be quarantined. Humanity would be trapped in their own solar system forever, unable to explore the stars or trade with other species. The choice was simple: submit or be isolated. The ambassador returned to Earth with a heavy heart. He reported directly to President Minji in Geneva. The president was a former military officer who had led her country through 2 wars before becoming Earth's leader. She listened to Ji-hoon's report without interrupting. Around the conference table sat her most trusted advisors. Defense Minister Tae-hang looked angry enough to punch through the wall. Diplomatic Secretary Hai-jin seemed ready to cry. Intelligence Chief Soo-jin took notes with a blank expression that revealed nothing. Tae-hang spoke first. He said they should refuse and prepare for war. Hai-jin quickly explained why that was impossible. The Council's military power was overwhelming. Their ships could destroy Earth from orbit before humanity could fire a single shot. Earth's weapons were primitive compared to alien technology. Fighting back would mean extinction. The room fell into depressed silence as everyone realized they had no good options. President Minji sat quietly for a long time. Her advisors knew that look. She was thinking, calculating, planning. Finally, she smiled. It was a thin, dangerous smile that made Tae-young lean forward with interest. Minji asked her assistant to contact Director Dong-woo from the Global Corrections Authority. She wanted him in Geneva within the hour. Hai-jin looked confused and asked what the president was thinking. Minji simply said they were going to give the Council exactly what they asked for. Director Dong-woo arrived quickly. He was an older man who had spent 30 years managing Earth's prison system. President Minji dismissed most of her staff, keeping only her core advisors. Then she explained her plan. The Council wanted 5,000 humans. They didn't specify which humans. Minji wanted Dongwu to compile a list of the 5,000 worst criminals in the entire global prison system. Murderers, terrorists, war criminals, cartel leaders, and anyone else who was serving life sentences or waiting for execution. Dongwu looked shocked. He stammered that these were dangerous people. Many of them had killed hundreds or thousands of victims. Some had committed crimes so terrible that rehabilitation was impossible. Sending them into the galaxy would be like releasing wild animals. Sujin interrupted him. She said that was exactly the point. These criminals were survivors. They were cunning, ruthless, and adaptable. They had thrived in the worst environments Earth could create. If anyone could survive whatever the Council threw at them, it would be these people. Taeyang started laughing. He understood the brilliance of the plan. The Council expected Earth to send scientists, engineers, and military officers. They expected compliant, educated people who would serve quietly. Instead, they would get Earth's most dangerous criminals. People who didn't follow rules. People who had spent their entire lives fighting against authority. People who would cause absolute chaos wherever they were sent. Haijin raised an ethical concern. She asked if it was right to unleash criminals on the galaxy. What if they hurt innocent aliens? What if they made humanity look barbaric? President Minji walked to the window and stared out at the city below. She said the Council had enslaved hundreds of species. They treated entire civilizations as property. Maybe it was time the Council learned what humanity was really like. Not the polite, diplomatic version they expected, but the raw, violent, stubborn version that had clawed its way to the top of Earth food chain. Director Dongwu asked if the president was absolutely certain. This decision couldn't be reversed. Once these criminals were sent to the Council, there would be consequences. Minji turned from the window and said she had never been more certain of anything in her life. The Council wanted to test humanity. They wanted to see what humans were made of. Fine. They would get an education they would never forget. Over the next 3 weeks, Dongwu worked with prison officials across the planet. They identified candidates from maximum security facilities on Earth, Luna, and Mars. Each criminal was given a choice: volunteer for the Council's tribute program or remain in prison forever. Not a single person refused. Even the worst murderers and terrorists preferred the unknown dangers of space over spending the rest of their lives in a cell. Some actually seemed excited about the opportunity. The selection included some truly terrifying individuals. Daho had been a mercenary commander during the resource wars. He had killed over 300 people and showed no remorse. G1 was a cyber-terrorist who had crashed continental power grids and caused thousands of deaths through her actions. Kangman was a serial killer who had evaded capture for 15 years. Nari had created a biological weapon that killed millions before she was caught. These were humanity's monsters, and now they were being gift-wrapped for the Galactic Council. The prisoners were transported to a military spaceport in Kazakhstan. As they boarded the transport ships bound for the Council station, many of them smiled for the first time in years. They were leaving their cells behind. Whatever waited for them in space had to be better than concrete walls and armed guards. None of them knew they were about to become the most disruptive force the galaxy had ever encountered. None of them realized they were carrying humanity's revenge in their very nature. Defense. Minister Taeyang stood with President Minji on the observation deck as the ships launched into the sky. He asked if she thought the criminals would survive their ordeal. Minji watched the ships disappear into the clouds. She said survival wasn't what concerned her. What concerned her was whether the galaxy could survive them. The Council had demanded Earth's finest specimens. They were about to discover that humanity's finest could also be its most dangerous. The transport ships carrying Earth's criminals arrived at Station Meridian after a 3-week journey through hyperspace. The station was the Council's primary processing center for new tribute species. Administrator Kelthrix waited in the main docking bay with representatives from a dozen different alien races. They had all come to witness humanity's submission. It was always entertaining to watch a new species learn their place in the galactic order. Kelthrix had processed hundreds of tribute deliveries over the centuries, and they all followed the same pattern. The new arrivals would be frightened, confused, and desperate to please their new masters. The docking clamps engaged with heavy thuds that echoed through the bay. Kelthrix activated the viewing screens so all the observers could see inside the human ships. They expected to see cowering scientists, defeated soldiers, and broken leaders. Instead, the cargo ramps lowered to reveal 5,000 humans wearing bright orange jumpsuits. These humans didn't look frightened at all. They walked down the ramps with confidence, their eyes scanning the station with calculating intensity. They looked like predators studying new hunting grounds. Ambassador Ji-hoon appeared on the communication screen. His face was professionally neutral as he greeted Administrator Kelthrix. He confirmed that Earth had delivered exactly 5,000 humans as tribute, precisely as the Council demanded. Kelthrix felt the first whisper of something wrong. These humans looked different from the diplomatic delegation that had visited months earlier. Their posture was aggressive. Their expressions were cold. Kelthrix asked where humanity's leaders and scientists were. Ji-hoon smiled and said these were humanity's finest specimens. Each one was exceptional in their field. Earth had sent exactly what the Council requested. Before Kelthrix could ask more questions, the communication cut off. The administrator felt uneasy but couldn't identify why. The tribute delivery met all the Council's requirements. 5,000 humans had arrived on schedule. Everything appeared correct on paper. Kelthrix ordered the processing to begin. The humans were scanned, cataloged, and assigned identification numbers. Medical examinations confirmed they were all healthy. Background checks revealed nothing because Earth hadn't provided detailed records. As far as the Council knew, these were ordinary humans selected for tribute service. The humans were sorted and distributed across the galaxy according to the Council's needs. Mining colonies received the physically strong ones. Research facilities got those who scored high on intelligence tests. Entertainment districts took the ones who looked aggressive enough for gladiatorial combat. Manufacturing centers accepted anyone who could follow basic instructions. Within a week, all 5,000 humans had been shipped to their new assignments. Across dozens of different worlds, Daeho arrived at a mining colony on Volthera 3. The planet was a toxic nightmare, with an atmosphere that slowly poisoned anything that breathed it. The Council used it to mine rare minerals that powered their technology. For decades, they had forced members of a species called the Grex to work in these mines. The Grex were short, muscular creatures with thick skin that resisted the poison better than most species. They worked 10-hour shifts without breaks, supervised by Vorton overseers who carried electric whips. Daeho stepped off the transport and immediately began assessing his situation. He had commanded mercenary troops in 3 different wars. He knew how to evaluate terrain, identify weaknesses, and exploit opportunities. The mine's security was laughable. The guards were lazy and arrogant. They didn't expect slaves to fight back. The weapons were stored in a poorly guarded armory. The communication systems were old and vulnerable. Within an hour, Daeho had mentally mapped out 17 different ways to take control of the facility. Akan, Vorton overseer, approached Daeho with an electric whip crackling in his hand. The alien explained the rules in simple terms. Work 10 hours every day. No rest periods. No complaints. Obey all orders immediately. Failure meant punishment. The overseer raised his whip to emphasize the point. Daeho looked at the alien with the cold eyes of someone who had killed hundreds of people. He said he understood perfectly. The overseer felt a chill run through his metallic body, but dismissed it as imagination. G1 was sent to a cyber research facility on the homeworld of the Nexans. The Nexans had evolved from artificial intelligence and believed their computer systems were impenetrable. They were a proud species that considered themselves the galaxy's foremost experts in digital technology. The research facility where G1 was assigned studied quantum computing and advanced algorithms. They put her in a small cell with a basic computer terminal and told her to input data for 8 hours daily. They thought she was just another organic being who could type. They had no idea what a human hacker was capable of. G1 smiled as her fingers touched the keyboard. She had crashed continental power grids back on Earth. She had stolen financial data from central banks. She had broken into military systems that were designed to resist nuclear war scenarios. The Nexan systems were sophisticated, but they thought in predictable patterns. They built their security around logic and mathematics. G1 thought in chaos. She found vulnerabilities by doing things that made no logical sense. Within 6 hours, she had identified 3 critical weaknesses in the facility's network. Within 12 hours, she had created hidden backdoors and systems throughout the entire research division. Nari ended up at a biological research laboratory owned by a pharmaceutical corporation. The corporation produced medicine for dozens of species and made enormous profits from their patents. They assigned Nari to clean laboratory equipment and dispose of biological waste. They gave her a list of safety protocols and told her to follow them exactly. They had no idea she had once created a bioweapon that killed millions of people on Earth. They didn't know she understood biology better than most of their lead researchers. Nari studied the laboratory procedures and immediately saw dozens of ways she could contaminate their production. Lines. Kang Min and 100 other humans were sent to an entertainment district on a wealthy core world. The district featured gladiatorial combat for the amusement of rich aliens who bet on the outcomes. Fighters were usually prisoners from various species who had committed crimes. The fights weren't always to the death, but injuries were common and medical care was minimal. The arena's owners believed humans would provide interesting new entertainment. They had heard stories about human violence and wanted to see it firsthand. They put Kanmin in the arena against a Krelix warrior, a species known for their aggression. The fight lasted 30 seconds before Kanmin broke the alien's arm in 3 places. On an agricultural world, a prisoner named Minho was assigned to work in vast fields that produced food for the council's military. Thousands of workers from dozens of species toiled under harsh conditions. Minho had been a labor organizer on Earth before he murdered a corporate executive. He knew how to talk to workers. He knew how to identify shared grievances. He knew how to build solidarity across different groups. Within days, he was quietly moving through the work crews, learning their languages, understanding their complaints, and planting ideas about resistance. Yuna arrived at a manufacturing station that produced components for starships. The station employed thousands of workers and operated 24 hours a day. Yuna had been an industrial saboteur during Earth's corporate wars. She had destroyed factories, disrupted supply chains, and caused billions in damages. The manufacturing station was far more complex than anything on Earth, but the principles were the same. She studied the production processes carefully, looking for critical points where small changes would cause massive failures. All across the galaxy, 5,000 human prisoners settled into their new situations. None of them acted out immediately. They were too smart for that. They watched and learned. They studied the security systems. They identified the power structures. They mapped out the weaknesses. They were predators in new territory, and predators took time to understand their hunting grounds before they struck. Back on Station Meridian, Administrator Kelfrix reviewed the initial reports from the various facilities. Everything appeared normal. The humans were working as assigned. There were no immediate problems. Kelfrix felt relieved. Perhaps the earlier unease had been unfounded. Perhaps these humans were just like any other tribute species. The administrator filed the reports and moved on to other matters. It would be 3 months before Kelfrix realized the terrible mistake the council had made. By then, it would be far too late to stop what was coming. 3 months passed since the human prisoners arrived at their various assignments. Administrator Kelfrix sat in his office on Station Meridian, reviewing reports as he did every morning. Today, however, something was different. His communication console showed 73 urgent messages waiting for review. That was unusual. Kelfrix opened the first message and felt his metallic body go cold. It was from the Voltura 3 mining colony. The message simply said, "Revolt in progress. Send military assistance immediately." Kelfrix pulled up the security footage from Voltura 3. What he saw made no sense. The Grex slaves had stopped working. They were armed with improvised weapons made from mining equipment. They had barricaded the mine entrances and were holding the Vorten overseers hostage. At the center of it all stood the human named Deho. He stood on top of a massive mining hauler, addressing hundreds of Grex workers in their own language. How had a human learned Grex speech in just 3 months? Kelfrix turned on the audio feed. Deho's voice carried clearly across the mining pit. He told the Grex that the overseers couldn't kill all of them. He explained that the mine couldn't operate without workers. The math was simple. Either the Vorten negotiated better conditions, or the mine would stop producing minerals. The council needed these minerals. That gave the workers power. The Grex listened with growing excitement. None of them had ever thought about their situation this way before. The human was teaching them something dangerous: collective action. The colony administrator had tried to restore order by making an example of Deho. 3 Vorten guards attacked the human with electric whips. The security footage showed what happened next. Deho moved with brutal efficiency. He disarmed the first guard and used a whip to kill the second. The third guard died when Deho snapped his neck with bare hands. The Grex workers watched in stunned silence as a single human defeated 3 armed Vorten. Then they started cheering. Within hours, Deho had effectively taken control of the entire mining operation. Kelfrix moved to the next urgent message. This one came from the Nexan Cyber Research Facility. The message was longer and more panicked. It explained that the human tribute named G1 had somehow corrupted their computer networks. She had stolen research data worth billions of credits. The Nexans couldn't remove her access from their systems. Every time they tried to lock her out, she appeared somewhere else in their network. She had embedded herself into their infrastructure like a digital parasite. The facility director's follow-up message was even worse. G1 had made demands. She wanted freedom for herself and every other human working in the facility. If her demands weren't met, she would release all their proprietary research to the galactic black market. The Nexans couldn't call her bluff because she had already released small samples to prove she could do it. Their competitors were already analyzing Nexan secrets. The facility director was begging for help. Kelfrix scrolled through more messages, and each one brought worse news. The gladiatorial arena reported that Kangman had won 40 consecutive matches. When they tried to arrange an exhibition deathmatch, he had turned on his guards instead. He killed 6 of them and freed 30 other prisoners before barricading himself in the arena's armory. He was now heavily armed and negotiating for the release of all human. Gladiators. The pharmaceutical laboratory sent a frantic message about Nari. She had contaminated an entire production line with a harmless but easily detectable compound. The contamination forced them to destroy 3 months of inventory worth millions of credits. Nari told them this was a demonstration. She could have released actual toxins that would kill anyone who took the medicine. Her message was clear: treat the human workers better, or face real sabotage next time. From the agricultural world, reports indicated that a human named Minho had organized a labor strike. Workers from 6 different species had stopped harvesting food. They demanded better living conditions, shorter work hours, and actual payment for their labor. The plantation owners were shocked. Their workers had never organized before. Different species usually didn't cooperate because of language barriers and cultural differences. Somehow, this human had united them. The manufacturing station sent video footage of catastrophic production failures. A human named Yuna had sabotaged the assembly lines so subtly that it took weeks to discover the problem. Components that looked perfect would fail during stress testing. The sabotage was so sophisticated that engineers couldn't determine how she had done it. Repairing the damage would take months and cost enormous amounts of money. When questioned, Yuna simply smiled and said accidents happen. Kelthrix pulled up a galaxy-wide map and marked every location where humans had been sent as tribute. Red warning indicators appeared across dozens of worlds. Mining operations disrupted. Research facilities compromised. Manufacturing plants failing. Entertainment venues in chaos. Labor strikes spreading. Everywhere the humans had been assigned, disaster followed. But it wasn't random chaos. The humans were coordinated. They were executing a plan. The administrator opened a special intelligence report that made everything worse. Surveillance had detected unusual communication patterns between different facilities. The humans were talking to each other across vast distances. They had no official access to faster-than-light communication systems, yet somehow they were coordinating their actions. The intelligence analysts suspected the human named G1 had created an underground network that used existing council infrastructure. She had given every human prisoner the ability to communicate secretly. Kelthrix reviewed profiles of the human prisoners and finally understood the terrible truth. These weren't ordinary citizens. Earth had sent criminals. The files revealed murder convictions, terrorism charges, war crimes, and every other horrible offense imaginable. Each human was an expert at operating outside the law. They were survivors who had thrived in Earth's worst environments. The Council had wanted humanity's finest specimens, and Earth had sent exactly that. Their finest criminals' dot reports continued flooding in throughout the day. A human on a transport hub had organized a workers' union among the dock workers. Another human in a medical facility had exposed safety violations that endangered patients. One particularly creative prisoner had started an underground newspaper that spread information about worker rights across an entire station. The humans weren't just causing individual problems. They were starting a movement. The worst part was that other species were joining them. Slaves and workers who had served the council for generations were suddenly questioning their situation. The humans were teaching them concepts like collective bargaining, sabotage, and civil disobedience. They were sharing knowledge that the council had worked hard to suppress. They were turning passive victims into active resistors. Kelthrix composed an urgent message to the Supreme Arbiter, the highest authority in the Galactic Council. The message explained the situation in stark terms. The human tribute had become a galactic crisis. They needed to act immediately before the entire council system collapsed. Kelthrix recommended military intervention to round up the humans and contain the damage. The administrator waited anxiously for a response. While waiting, Kelthrix decided to contact Earth directly. Perhaps the human government could help control their citizens. The administrator opened a communication channel to Ambassador Ji-hun. The human appeared on the screen with the same professional neutrality as before. Kelthrix demanded to know what Earth had done. These humans weren't ordinary people. They were criminals and terrorists. Earth had deliberately deceived the Council. Ji-hoon listened calmly to the accusations. When Kelthrix finished, the ambassador smiled slightly. He pointed out that the Council had demanded 5,000 of humanity's finest specimens. Earth had provided exactly that. The Council never specified what skills or temperament they wanted. They never asked about criminal records. They simply demanded 5,000 humans, and Earth had complied with the letter of the agreement. Kelthrix felt rage building inside. The humans had played word games with the Council's demands. Ji-hoon continued speaking. He said the Council wanted to see what humanity was capable of. Now they knew. These prisoners were humanity's most resourceful survivors. They had expertise in violence, deception, and resistance. They refused to submit to authority. They were adaptable, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. If the Council was unhappy with Earth's tribute, perhaps they shouldn't have demanded tribute at all. The communication ended, leaving Kelthrix alone with the mounting crisis reports. The administrator realized with growing horror that this wasn't going to end quickly. The humans had no intention of submitting. They were going to fight sabotage and disrupt until they got what they wanted. And what they wanted, apparently, was freedom for themselves and everyone else the Council had enslaved. More reports arrived. A mining colony had formally surrendered to its workers. A research facility had agreed to pay its human employees. An entertainment district had shut down its gladiatorial games after a riot. The humans were winning. Against all logic and probability, these 5,000 criminals were defeating the mighty Galactic Council one facility at a time. The Galactic Sovereign Council held an emergency session for the first time in 50 years. The massive assembly hall filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Holographic projections showed delegates from every corner of known space. The mood was tense and angry. Everyone had the same complaint. The humans had to be stopped. Administrator Kelthrix stood at the center podium, presenting evidence of the crisis that had spread across Council territory in just 6 months. The main display showed a galaxy-wide map covered in red markers. Each marker represented a location where human prisoners had caused disruptions. There were over 300 incidents now. Mining operations throughout the Outer Rim had suffered production losses. Research facilities reported data theft and security breaches. Manufacturing centers faced constant sabotage. Entertainment venues dealt with prisoner revolts. Agricultural worlds experienced labor strikes. The humans were everywhere, and they were coordinating their actions. A representative from the Nexan species spoke first. Her digital voice carried frustration and fear. She explained that the human named Ji-won had created an underground communication network that spanned dozens of star systems. The Nexans were the galaxy's foremost experts in cyber technology, yet they couldn't shut down a network created by a single human in just months. Ji-won had piggybacked her system onto Council infrastructure so cleverly that removing it would cripple essential services. She had effectively made herself and her network untouchable. The mining consortium representative stepped forward next. He was a Vorton-like Kelthrix, and his metallic plates flickered with anger as he spoke. The human called Deho had not only taken control of Volther 3, but had turned it into a symbol of resistance. He armed the Grex population with weapons made from mining equipment. He trained them in military tactics. He established what he called a workers' republic. Worse, he was offering refuge to escaped slaves from other mining colonies. Volther 3 had become a sanctuary for anyone fleeing Council authority. More representatives shared their stories. A manufacturing guild reported that their facilities operated at 60% capacity because of sabotage and strikes. A pharmaceutical corporation complained that human workers had exposed their illegal testing practices to the galactic media. An entertainment conglomerate explained that 3 of their gladiatorial arenas had shut down permanently after human prisoners led violent revolts. An agricultural consortium revealed that food production had dropped by 40% due to organized strikes. What made everything worse was that the humans weren't working alone. They had inspired other species to rebel. Slaves who had served the council for generations were suddenly demanding rights. Workers who had accepted terrible conditions were now forming unions. Species that barely communicated with each other were uniting under human leadership. The humans were teaching concepts like collective action, labor rights, and civil disobedience to cultures that had never heard these ideas before. Calfrix presented intelligence reports that showed the scope of coordination. The humans held regular virtual meetings using G1's secret network. They shared strategies and tactics. They warned each other about council military movements. They coordinated strikes to maximize economic damage. They weren't just individual troublemakers anymore. They had become an organized resistance movement with 5,000 trained members spread across the galaxy. A delegate from a core world raised an obvious question. Why couldn't the council simply execute the human prisoners? That would end the problem quickly. Calfrix explained why that wasn't possible. First, the humans had made themselves valuable. Deho controlled the only functional mine on Volthera 3. G1 held research data from dozens of facilities hostage. Other humans had embedded themselves into critical operations. Killing them would cause immediate chaos. Second, the humans had made friends. Other species would riot if the council executed the prisoners. The humans had become symbols of resistance, thought the Supreme Arbiter finally spoke. It was an ancient being of pure energy called a Luminar, and its voice resonated directly in everyone's mind. The Arbiter had witnessed thousands of tribute deliveries over centuries. Never had a tribute species caused so much disruption. The situation was unprecedented. The Arbiter asked Calfrix what solution he proposed. Calfrix hesitated before answering. He said the only solution was negotiation. The council needed to bring human leadership to the table and reach an agreement. The assembly hall erupted in angry voices. Negotiate with criminals? Give in to slaves? Accept demands from tribute species? The suggestions violated everything the council stood for. They were the supreme authority in the galaxy. They didn't negotiate with inferior species. Several delegates threatened to withdraw from the council if they showed such weakness. The Arbiter raised its energy form, and silence fell immediately. The Arbiter explained that pride wouldn't restore mining operations or repair manufacturing facilities. Sometimes practical solutions required uncomfortable compromises. The Supreme Arbiter issued orders. Administrator Calthrix would contact Earth's government and arrange formal negotiations. The Council would hear the human demands and consider reasonable compromises. The delegates grumbled but accepted the decision. They had no choice. The economic damage was mounting daily. Resources weren't being extracted. Products weren't being manufactured. Food wasn't being harvested. The humans and their allies were strangling the Council's economy slowly but surely. Calthrix sent a formal invitation to President Minji. The message requested her presence at Station Meridian for diplomatic negotiations. To Calthrix's surprise, Minji accepted immediately. She arrived 2 weeks later with a full delegation. But she didn't come alone. Through holographic technology, 5 humans appeared alongside her in the negotiation chamber. Calthrix recognized them from the intelligence files. Deho, Jaiwan, Nari, Kangman, and Minho. The criminals themselves would participate in the negotiations. The Supreme Arbiter opened the discussion by acknowledging the situation. The human tribute had caused significant disruptions throughout Council territory. The Arbiter suggested that perhaps Earth would like to withdraw its citizens to restore peace. President Minji responded with a single word: no. The negotiation chamber fell silent. Representatives from a dozen species stared in shock. No one refused the Supreme Arbiter. No species had ever declined a council suggestion before. President Minji stood and addressed the assembly calmly. She explained that Earth had provided tribute exactly as demanded. The council received 5,000 human citizens. What the council chose to do with those citizens was the council's decision. If the council was unhappy with how those citizens behaved, that wasn't Earth's problem. The humans were acting exactly as any human would act when forced into slavery. They were resisting. They were fighting back. They were refusing to submit. That was human nature. Deho's hologram spoke up. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat. He stated that the council had enslaved them, and they had freed themselves. That was what humans did. John added that the council had given them access to systems, and they had exploited those systems. That was also what humans did. Nari smiled coldly and said the council had thought they would be compliant, but humans proved them wrong. That was definitely what humans did. Kelthrix felt frustration building. He pointed out that Earth had sent criminals, not ordinary citizens. They had deceived the council. President Minji countered that the council never asked about criminal records. They demanded 5,000 humans without specifications. Earth provided exactly that. If the council wanted to blame anyone for the selection, they should blame themselves for making such a vague demand. Besides, who better to send than people who were experts at surviving hostile environments and resisting authority? The Supreme Arbiter attempted to regain control of the negotiations. It asked what Earth wanted to end the disruptions. Minji's answer shocked everyone in the chamber. She demanded that the council end the tribute system entirely. Every species currently held as tribute should be freed immediately. The practice of forcing slavery on new civilizations should be abolished permanently. The chamber erupted in angry voices again. Representatives shouted that such demands were impossible. The tribute system had existed for thousands of years. It was tradition. Kanman's hologram laughed. He said tradition didn't make something right. Just because the council had enslaved species for thousands of years didn't mean they should continue. He asked how many of the council members would volunteer to work in the mines they forced others into. How many would accept the conditions they imposed on tribute species? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Minho added that slavery by any other name was still slavery. Calling it tribute didn't change what it actually was. President Minji gave the council a choice. They could end the tribute system voluntarily and negotiate fair labor practices. Or the 5,000 human prisoners would continue doing what they did best: disrupting, resisting, and inspiring others to rebel. She asked how long the council's economy could survive 5,000 humans working actively against them. How many more species would join the resistance? The negotiations lasted for 2 weeks. Representatives from hundreds of species watched as President Minji and her delegation of criminals rewrote thousands of years of galactic tradition. The Supreme Arbiter opened each session by proposing compromises that the humans rejected. The council wanted to reform the tribute system gradually. Minji insisted on immediate abolition. The council suggested paying tribute workers small wages. The humans demanded full citizenship rights. The council offered to improve working conditions slightly. The prisoners threatened to expand their resistance campaign. On the 5th day of negotiations, another major incident occurred. A human prisoner named Borum had been assigned to a luxury resort that catered to wealthy council members. She had worked as a financial crimes investigator on Earth before murdering her corrupt supervisor. At the resort, she discovered that council members were embezzling money from the tribute program itself. She sent evidence to Jiwon, who immediately released it to every major news network in the galaxy. The scandal dominated headlines across hundreds of worlds. The exposure of corruption weakened the Council's moral authority. How could they demand tribute from other species while stealing money meant to care for those same workers? Public opinion shifted dramatically. Species that had remained neutral suddenly supported the human position. Even some council members privately admitted that the system needed fundamental change. The scandal gave President Minji more leverage in negotiations. By the end of the first week, the council had agreed to end forced tribute for all new species. That was progress, but not enough. Minji demanded freedom for every being currently held as tribute across the entire galaxy. The Supreme Arbiter said such a sudden release would cause economic chaos. Millions of workers would need transport, housing, and employment. The logistics were overwhelming. Daeho pointed out that wasn't his problem. The council had created the situation by enslaving people. The council could deal with the consequences of freeing them. G1 suggested a practical solution. Give current tribute workers a choice. They could accept immediate freedom with transportation back to their homeworlds. Or they could stay at their current jobs with fair wages, reasonable hours, and full legal rights. Let the workers decide for themselves. The council representatives looked uncomfortable. They knew many workers would choose to leave immediately. Their economies would suffer massive labor shortages. But G1's proposal was more reasonable than forced immediate release. Nari added another demand. The council needed to establish labor standards across all their territories. Minimum wages, maximum work hours, safety regulations, and the right to organize unions. These protections would apply to every worker regardless of species. Council members protested that such regulations would increase costs dramatically. Nari smiled and reminded them that the alternative was continued sabotage, strikes, and economic collapse. Choose expensive regulations or choose chaos. The negotiations ground forward with painful slowness. Every detail required hours of debate. What constituted fair wages? How many hours made a reasonable workday? Which safety standards applied to different environments? The council tried to create loopholes that would preserve their power. The human delegation closed every loophole they found. Kamen proved surprisingly effective at this. He had studied law during his years in prison and could spot legal tricks immediately. On the 10th day, news arrived that changed everything. A coalition of former tribute species had formed a mutual defense pact. 20 different civilizations agreed to support each other militarily if the council tried to reinstate the tribute system. The coalition represented significant military power. While individually weaker than the council, together, they posed a real threat. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted fundamentally. The council could no longer simply impose their will through force. The Supreme Arbiter realized the situation had spiraled beyond the human prisoners. They had become symbols of a larger movement for freedom and rights. Executing them or imprisoning them again would create martyrs and strengthen the resistance. The only path forward was agreement. The Arbiter pushed council representatives to accept increasingly generous terms. Grumbling delegates finally agreed to most of the human demands. The final agreement abolished the tribute system permanently. All current tribute workers receive freedom and the choice to return home or stay as paid employees. New labor standards protected workers throughout council territory. An independent commission would oversee enforcement. Any species could file complaints about violations. Military intervention against strikes or protests was prohibited except in extreme situations. The agreement represented the most significant reform of council governance in thousands of years. President Minji signed the agreement on behalf of Earth. The Supreme Arbiter signed for the council. Representatives from dozens of species witnessed the ceremony. When it concluded, Kelfrix approached Minji privately. The administrator asked what would happen to the 5,000 human prisoners now. Would they return to Earth? Minji smiled and said that was up to them. Earth had sent them as tribute. If they wanted to come home, they were welcome. But they were adults who could make their own choices. Kelfrix arranged for transport ships to take any humans who wanted to return to Earth. Only 300 accepted the offer. The rest chose to stay in the galaxy. They had found purposes beyond their criminal pasts. Deho remained on Volthera 3, where he established a legitimate security company. He hired former Grek slaves and other freed workers. His company contracted with mining operations to provide protection services. He made more money legally than he ever did as a mercenary. Jiwan founded a cybersecurity firm that protected smaller species from exploitation by larger powers. Her company specialized in defending against corporate espionage and government surveillance. She became wealthy and famous, lecturing at universities about network security. She donated significant money to fund education programs for freed tribute workers. Her criminal skills found legal application in a galaxy that desperately needed better digital protection. Nari opened a medical research facility focused on developing treatments for diseases affecting poor species ignored by major pharmaceutical corporations. She worked without patents, sharing her discoveries freely. Her facility became famous for ethical research practices. She employed hundreds of scientists from dozens of species. Her past creating weapons transformed into a future saving lives. Kanman surprised everyone by becoming a defense attorney. He represented freed workers in legal disputes with their former employers. His knowledge of law combined with his reputation as a fearsome gladiator made him extremely effective. Few opposing lawyers wanted to face him in court. He won landmark cases that expanded worker rights even further than the original agreement. Across the galaxy, former human prisoners found new lives. Some started businesses. Others became teachers, sharing their skills with younger species. A few remained troublemakers, but directed their energy toward exposing corruption and injustice. They formed a loosely connected network that monitored council activities and reported violations of the new labor standards. They became permanent watchdogs, ensuring the reforms weren't quietly reversed. 6 months after the agreement, Ambassador Ji-hoon met with President Minji to review the situation. They sat in Minji's office in Geneva, looking out at the city. Ji-hoon admitted he had doubted the plan initially. Sending criminals as tribute seemed reckless and potentially disastrous. But it had worked better than anyone imagined. Minji said she had understood something fundamental about the situation. The council expected submission. They expected weakness. Sending humanity's most obedient citizens would have confirmed their expectations. Instead, Earth sent people who refused to submit to any authority. People who saw rules as suggestions. People who fought back when pressed. Those 5,000 criminals carried essential human characteristics: stubbornness, creativity, and absolute refusal to accept injustice. They were the worst of humanity in some ways, but they were also the purest expression of human nature. They would rather die than kneel. That attitude changed the Galaxy back on Earth. Director Dongwu reviewed reports about the former prisoners. He had spent 30 years managing criminals and believed few could truly change. Yet here was evidence of transformation. Not rehabilitation exactly, but repurposing. These people were still aggressive, cunning, and dangerous. But they had found ways to direct those traits toward constructive ends. They protected the weak instead of exploiting them. They fought corruption instead of practicing it. They built instead of destroyed. Defense Minister Taeyong asked President Minji if she felt any guilt about unleashing criminals on the galaxy. Minji considered the question carefully. She said she felt no guilt because the galaxy needed exactly what those prisoners provided. The Council had created a system of oppression. Someone needed to break that system. Traditional diplomats couldn't do it. Scientists and engineers couldn't do it. But criminals who specialized in breaking systems, they were perfect for the job. The Galactic Council never again demanded tribute from any species. The concept became taboo in galactic society.